Today I'll be talking about family members and their relationships with incarcerated individuals and during the reentry period. In order to maintain relationships with incarcerated individuals, family members have to devote a great deal of their own resources to do so. The primary means of maintaining contact are phone calls, writing letters, or visiting at prisons. In one piece of research that I did in New York, I looked at the process of maintaining contact through visiting for family members who lived in New York City and rode a bus service to go to prisons throughout the state. Going on one visit was a 24-hour process for these family members, so clearly this demands a high level of time, energy, and money, other resources. The participants in my study described a number of strains that they encounter in trying to maintain the relationships. For example, they perform caretaking roles for the incarcerated individual by providing companionship, offering a range of supports, and at the same time that they are doing this, they are providing care for family members on the outside, particularly children. They also may experience economic strains as they try to maintain the family economically in the prisoner's absence, but at the same time they are devoting resources to the incarcerated individual. The phone calls and the visiting are quite costly. They may be depositing money into the commissary account, providing goods for the inmate. So there are a range of sometimes competing demands, and it's important to keep in mind that we are primarily talking about African American and Latina women who are from socially and economically marginalized neighborhoods. So what essentially happens is that they become engaged in a balancing act as they make decisions about how to provide support to the incarcerated individual and also maintain their lives on the outside. And what happens in some instances is that family members make decisions to either diminish contact with the incarcerated individual or to completely sever relationships, and it's because they simply cannot keep up with the demands of maintaining the relationship. When we look at the support that family members provide during the incarceration period, we may think of this as laying the foundation for what will happen upon the prisoner's release from prison. So scholars have long looked at the potential for family contact during visiting, during the incarceration period, to have multiple beneficial effects, such as decreased infraction rates, potentially lower recidivism, and research in this area has evolved quite a bit, and especially regarding the methods we use to study these issues, it has improved. So scholars in Florida did a study looking at levels of contact through visiting while a person was incarcerated, and they did in fact find that inmates who received visits had lower recidivism rates after their release, and they also had a longer period to recidivism when that did happen. In addition, we see that family provide very concrete, specific, what we might think of as instrumental supports. So help finding a job, providing a place to live, giving pocket money. These are all very tangible, immediate things that we know people need, and family are oftentimes the primary source of these types of supports. We also see increasing attention to the role of a shift in identity for a former offender. So the individual starts to get a sense that they are turning away from offending behavior, they're creating a new future for themselves, and family are very important in this regard, that family can provide a space for the emergence of pro-social roles and help people begin to see themselves in a different light, which is a very important part of the process of desistance and changing offending patterns. Family support is important for people released from prison because of the possibility that it may decrease offending. Scholars still have some work to do in figuring out specifically how and why this is the case, but one thing we might want to keep in mind is distinguishing between instrumental supports and emotional types of support. So clearly it's beneficial when family can help someone find a job or give them a place to live, but we see that this alone is not enough. These basic levels of supports are very important, but research is looking at the idea of the internal shifts in identity and particularly in internal motivation to change. So we need to get a sense of the interactions between the, for example, instrumental and emotional supports and the individual's own change process. We also see that family can enhance the supports that are offered either by the criminal justice system or perhaps other types of programs. In research that I did with colleagues looking at juvenile reentry, we found that there were some very interesting interactions at play as the young people desisted from crime. Program support was a crucial element, but at the same time, the young people who did desist cited some changes in their own level of motivation, and they also tapped into support from family members. So all three components needed to be there to aid in the desistance process. And the types of internal motivation that they talked about were perhaps focusing on their children and the future. Those young men who were gang members began to fear for their own safety as they saw their friends being perhaps killed or harmed. And so these were some of the internal forces and mechanisms, but family had to buttress that process by providing specific instrumental supports. The program helped the process for the young people, but even more importantly, the program provided support to the family members. So perhaps a mother needed assistance finding a job or identifying an educational program, and this program was able to help her do that. So by strengthening the entire family, this created the best possible circumstance for the young people to change their own offending behavior. There are a number of challenges family members face in offering support to formerly incarcerated individuals. One is managing the potential divergence between both parties' expectations of what might happen after release from prison and the reality of what actually happens. Researchers have seen that prisoners have very high expectations of family support, and in many cases families meet those expectations and actually exceed them. But it's important to pay attention to potential strains and conflicts that can emerge during the reentry period when we think of this expectations versus reality. In a piece of research that I did with a colleague, we were interested in how residential context might shape both prisoners and family members' exchanges of support. And we looked at people who went back to the family home after their release from prison and those who were placed in a halfway house. And one interesting finding was that the family members often had one perception of the type and level of support that they were providing, and the former prisoner may have perceived it differently. And this is not in and of itself problematic, but we need to recognize the potential for these gaps to create problems. In addition, we need to pay more attention to the bidirectionality of support. There's often an assumption that it's a one-way process with the family providing the formerly incarcerated individual support, and we don't acknowledge the various ways that that individual may also give back to the family. In addition, when we think about challenges that families face in offering support, we have to recognize the fact that we are largely working with individuals who are socially and economically marginalized, and to ask them to supplement the work of the criminal justice system by supporting folks who are involved with the system. We are potentially draining their own resources, and we need to be cognizant of the fact that the families need support themselves in order to help the person who has been incarcerated. I'm very interested in ideas about the internal identity shift that takes place as people change their behavior and potentially decrease offending, stop offending. And this is part of a growing body of research that looks at the idea of the offender's narrative and their own sense of self. And for me, I would like to explore how individuals in the person's broader social network, so that would be family, broadly defined, perhaps friends, and I would like to get a better sense of how those individuals can reinforce this process of identity change and transformation.